Joining us now is longtime CBS News colleague Morley Safer. Morley, good morning to you. Chris Wragge and Maggie Rodriquez here in New York.
Good morning.
What did Walter Cronkite mean to you?
Well, above all, he was a friend. When I came to work for CBS, shortly after I was hired, I went to Vietnam. And the feeling that you had as a correspondent covering this war that was in the course of escalating, at that kind of distance, before satellites and all of that stuff, you really felt like you were at the other end of the world and out of reach. And Walter changed that. You felt you had a friend in court as a correspondent, because Cronkite had been there, World War II and the aftermath. So, above all, he was a friend. He was also perhaps the funniest man I've ever known, off camera. I think people might have had an idea that this guy was all serious. He was not. The
really?
moment that
what kind of things would he do that were funny?
Well, many of them may not be repeatable, but he was a great drinking companion, I'll tell you that. And there used to be a really, I was going to say sleazy bar. It wasn't quite sleazy, but it was not the nicest place in the world that everybody went to after the broadcast went off the air, just about every night. And Walter never lost that kind of old front page wire service guy with a fedora and a press card in his hat. And he really kept that. He also was a man, a remarkable man in the sense that with all the adulation and everything else, he really was about the most down-to-earth person you could possibly know. And there was a wonderful grace about him, about how he approached stories. He was tough, but fair, about how he dealt with people. Many years ago, I was invited in one of those cruise things where he gave lectures, and I declined. Just not my kind of thing. And Walter loved to do those. And I asked Betsy, his wife, I said, how can Walter do that with people fawning all over him? And she said, Morley, you don't understand Walter. Walter loves people. And he truly did. He truly did. And always curious about what they did, where they came from, what their background was, what their interests were. And Katie mentioned in the obit just now, he loved the whole space exploration business. That to him was pure heaven. But he also loved every new gizmo that would come along. Walter got computers before most people had computers. In every conceivable navigational device that you could imagine for his boat. So even though he was a man of the 30s, you could say, he really thought like a man of the 21st century.
Morley, another member of Walter's A-team is Bob Schieffer, of course, and he joins us on the phone. He joins us live from California this morning. Bob, you once said that you wanted to be Walter when you grew up. Why?
I still do. Walter, when I was a young reporter, Walter was my idol. He was who I wanted to be when I grew up. And you know, when I got the chance to come to work at CBS News and come into that great Washington bureau, it was, I mean, I was just beyond myself. I thought it would never get any better than that. And the fact of the matter is it never did. Working for Walter Cronkite was one of the great honors of my life. Walter loved the news, and people understood that. Nothing got in front of the news for Walter Cronkite. He had this great respect for the news and the people who covered it, and also the people who made it. And it was just to be a part of that team and be with Walter. I mean, it's something I'll tell you, Maggie, I never got over it. This is someone we'll never see his likes again. He was a great mentor to me. He was the major influence on journalism in the 20th century. You know, I was sitting listening as Walter was talking about being the anchor man. You know, Walter was the first person that they used that term to describe. Nobody had ever called anybody an anchor man or an anchor, and someone, no one knows quite where the term came from, but someone started calling Walter the anchor man, and he, for me, will always be that, the anchor man. Amazing.
Bob, let me ask both you and Morley. You were both part of Walter's A-team. What was it like? Was it at all intimidating working for this man? Because he was watching and everything you read and wrote. Was it tough, or did he just make you better? I'll start with you, Bob.
It was just such an honor to be a part of it. I mean, I'll never forget when I walked into that great Washington bureau for the first time in 1969. Dan Rather was a White House correspondent. Roger Mudd was a Capitol Hill correspondent. Marvin Kalb, Daniel Shore, Eric Severide was doing the commentaries. I mean, I felt like I was some little leaguer who'd just been called up to Yankee Stadium, you know, to walk up to the plate and pinch hit. I couldn't believe I was there. But, you know, when you got a good story, Walter used to talk to the reporters. He'd call you out on the beat. What's going on? Why did they say this? Why did they do that? But on those days when Walter would call you after the broadcast and say, good job on that tonight, you really felt good about it, because that was the highest compliment you
Morley,
could get.
did you feel that way too?
Still the highest compliment you could get.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Walter was really the correspondent's friend at court. He was a very tough editor, a very tough, demanding man, but about as fair as you could be. And when you got things right, there was no praise that he wouldn't heap on you. And just a really remarkable boss. You know, people look at people on television as slightly cardboard characters, and of all of them, Walter was the most lively, most interesting, most demanding, most fair, certainly, editor I've ever worked for. What Bob said about, you know, there'll never be another one like him, is absolutely right. I think he captured a moment in history that's just not going to be repeated.
Morley, stay there. I'm going to have to cut you off just real quickly. We're going to come back to you, Morley Safer and Bob Schieffer. We thank you both for taking the time right now. We're going to get back to you a little later on in the broadcast.
Welcome back to The Early Show as we remember Walter Cronkite. We would like to hear from you this morning. If you would like to share your memories with us, we invite you to email us at SaturdayEarlyShow@cbsnews.com. And please include your contact information, and we'll try to read these tributes on the air. You know, we've been talking to a lot of people so far this morning, and one thing that we heard is that Walter Cronkite's passion was space. How ironic that almost 40 years to the day of the moon landing, he passes away.
Yeah.
It reminded me of something his wife said in an interview once. He was one of the finalists to be the first journalist up in space, but after the Challenger disaster, they scrapped that idea. And his wife said that he would always look up at the sky after that day and say, I want to go up there. Yeah. And I thought, kind of fitting for today.
And wonderful. And it was such, when we talked about him being almost like a boy, you looked at this man who guided this nation through some of its toughest times with such composure and such comfort. But at the same time, with the whole space exploration, he was like a kid in a candy store.
Exactly.
And he even said during Apollo 11, when he sat there, he was speechless for the first time ever. And he said he probably had about as much time as NASA did to actually come up with something to say, and couldn't do it. Joining us once again now is Bob Schieffer, anchor of Face the Nation and CBS's chief Washington correspondent. Bob, thanks for rejoining us once again. We know you're in Santa Barbara right now. What was it about Walter Cronkite that we'll never see another Walter Cronkite? What was so unique about this man?
Well, it went back to his love of the news. It went back to something else, too, and this is what people understood and why people came to trust him and depend on him. Walter was exactly off camera as he was on camera. This was the real deal. He was a reporter. He had been there. When you were reporting for Walter Cronkite, you knew that Walter understood the problems you were having getting a story. He knew the stories didn't just walk up to you and say, hey there, I'm a story, you can broadcast me now. Walter knew the trouble that you had to go to get the story, and so reporters love that. People understood that Walter was guiding you through these events. You never saw Walter Cronkite come off as someone who thought he was smarter than the rest of us. He was just somebody who did his homework, who was interested in the news, and who really liked to gather the news. Walter knew 12 presidents. Walter liked to talk to presidents, not because they were president, because he wanted to find out what was on their mind. He had this insatiable, almost childlike curiosity about everything he did, and he brought this enthusiasm to the broadcast. And the leader always sets the tone. That's the most important thing that the leader does, and Walter always set the right tone. He set the right standards. He set the right kind of enthusiasm, and he just wanted to make you get out there and get some news for people, and because that's what he liked to do, and that's why he made this organization what he did.
Yeah, he walked the walk. He didn't just talk the talk. And a lot of people I've been reading said that they were a little scared of him for that reason, because 2 hours before the show, he would sit everybody down and, like a drill sergeant, make everybody explain why they chose to put in the broadcast the stories that they did and why certain stories didn't make the cut. Did you ever see that, Walter Cronkite, Bob?
Oh, yes, and that's what we as reporters loved about Walter Cronkite. If you came up with a story and you got it at the last minute, you just call Walter directly, and he would take your call, and you'd say, Walter, we need to get this story on the air, and here's why. And he had this great sense of news, and Walter delighted in just tearing the whole broadcast apart at about 6:20, and putting in a new lead story, and if it was your lead story, if your story, you liked it even more. But he was the guy that you went to, and you knew that Walter knew what news was, and so we'd call him and say, Walter, we got to get this in. NBC's going with this story, and or ABC, and Walter said, well, we've got to have that in the broadcast, and man, he would turn things upside down. It was a wonder to behold to see him in action. He really saw himself as the editor. Maggie, we talk about using the blue pencil. Walter actually had a blue pencil that he used from time to time. I mean, he did the whole deal.
I heard he would send the copy back to the writers, all afternoon long. And I heard he drove 3 writers to drink. I really did.
And, and Bob, it's funny, too, we also talk about his relationship with presidents. And you said the reporters would call him. Lots of people called him, including LBJ one time when he was actually on the air. Could you ever imagine sitting there anchoring the evening news and getting a call from the president while you were live?
Well, my guess is that Walter probably took that call. I mean, Walter talked about people would try to call him, but if Walter thought there was some news there, he'd find a way to take that call. Yeah. And he was always open to news, and that's what, I said last night during one of the broadcasts. Walter once said to me, there's nothing like a little news to pep up a newscast. Walter knew what newscasts were about, and that was getting the news and putting it on television. Nothing got in front of the news as far as Walter was concerned. That came first. Nothing got in front of the news, including Walter himself. He knew what the anchor's job was. It was to report the news, not to be the news.
He was one of a kind. Bob, thank you. Please do stick around.
Okay.